welcome viewers to this episode of Unmute. And this episode, we are again looking at what we say beyond profit. We are looking at corporate governance. And why? Because I think in the early 70s and 80s, we had for-profit, state and civil society in a very interesting tension, creative tension. Today, the market rules the state and rules civil society space. And therefore, there's been a huge shift. We need to understand how it impacts state. We need to understand how it impacts civil society. And therefore, I'm delighted. I'm delighted to have the person who sort of spans the entire spectrum, Dr. Sunil Parekh, जिसे हम प्यार से सुनील भाई कहते हैं. He's known in the corporate world as a captain. They use the word captain of industry. In civil society, he's known as a person who humanizes corporate space, and therefore he's the man to go to. His career spans in several international fora, in policy spaces, Davos, you name it, climate change. He's represented India, not just Gujarat, India, in all those spaces, trying to create the niche that India is also an important player. He was the first one who that government called to run the first vibrant Gujarat. And it was a runaway success. It was after that every state followed the idea of a vibrant state and bringing private sector investment in the thing. But on the other hand, I have personally witnessed his sensitivity to civic issues. He would actually call up, there was a man who's avenging death, he'll send me, Gagan, kya ho raha hai iska? What are we doing about it? I remember the earthquake. He was leading the CII at that time into rehabilitation. But also the policy space. People ask him, consult him, what could be the policy guideline? He's also in the corporate governance space. And more recently, he is now taken over as chairman of a very, very important institution which Manubhai Shah had started, which is the Consumer Education Search. So, who better? And then, of course, I forget, when we initiated post-COVID, the whole issue of social compact, he was our man or driver to talk to industry, to say, kya kar rahe ho bhai? So thank you, Sunil bhai. Thank you for being with us today. And believe me, there'll be a lot of people wanting to understand and demystify this and to crack this tension between corporate space, civic space, state, and how do we handle that. So once again, thank you.
गगन, आपने जिस तरीके से सुनील भाई का एक व्यक्तित्व का विवेचन किया है कि जिस ढंग से इट्स अ पर्सनालिटी विद मल्टीट्यूड्स, कि बहुत सारे अलग अलग भूमिकाओं में सुनील भाई ने अभी तक काम किया है. तो सुनील भाई, मुझे इससे शुरुआत हम करेंगे शायद कि अनम्यूट पे जो भी गेस्ट आते हैं तो उनसे हम पूछते हैं कि भाई व्हाट वर योर सोर्सेज ऑफ मोटिवेशन. आपको कहाँ से ये सब ताकत मिलती है, कहाँ से इंस्पिरेशन मिलता है, कहाँ से आप ये करने के लिए और आज भी कर रहे हैं, ये उत्साह, ये कहाँ से?
ये सवाल तो probably my late parents would have been able to answer better. क्योंकि कहाँ से इंस्पिरेशन का सोर्स है तो वो तो मालूम नहीं है, लेकिन इंस्पिरेशन है वो मैं जानता हूँ. सुबह उठता हूँ तो मुझे लगता है कि आज मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ. मैंने काफ़ी साल कॉर्पोरेट लाइफ में बिताए हैं, but actively when I was directly involved for the bottom line, I stopped working in those kind of situations in 94-95. So from my real journey for me, 95 से लेके अभी तक जो हमारे जो लगभग 35 years are there, that has been the years of personal growth. And while being engaged with corporates, because that was the only thing I used to know how to do it. तो मैं नाइजीरिया गया था, I got a good job, I earned enough money, and I decided that I want to now step out and do something different. So that brought me back to Ahmedabad, और 2 daughters थी, which was a good city to settle down in. And I first took up from a narrow focus of an industry, I joined and started the CII Gujarat office. And उसमें से जो एसोसिएशन का जो संगठन का जो पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू रहता है इज सो डिफरेंट फ्रॉम एन इंडिविजुअल कंपनीज पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. तो मेंटल ग्रोथ हुआ, सेंसिटिविटी टू अदर स्टेक होल्डर्स शुरू हुई. एंड देन उसी दरमियान में कच्छ में अर्थक्वेक हुआ जिसका इन्होंने जिक्र किया था. एंड इट वाज एन अपॉर्चुनिटी कि हम लोग सब इंडस्ट्री में सब बड़े बड़े जो धुरंधर इंडस्ट्री वाले थे, उसमें नारायण मूर्ति थे, राहुल बजाज थे, मुंजाल्स हैड कम एंड गोदरेजेस हैड कम, और ये सब साथ मिलके हमने बचाव विलेज में पूरा रिहैबिलिटेशन प्रोग्राम शुरू किया. It was a grand success. It was done in record time, appreciated by the government. And that is when I realized that when corporates get engaged with civil society and government, because an example of a disaster is an example of collaboration. Correct. I realized that something beautiful happens. And that was my real true source of inspiration. Not so much of a human being like people have role model, but the fact that coming together and collaborating is so much better than doing it alone. That realization is what is driving, and it changed my personality. Otherwise, as a student, I was an introvert. When I joined Telco in Pune, I was an introvert. But I became an extrovert when suddenly I was thrust with, multi-stakeholder engagement issues. And that is a personal transformation story, and it has been very rewarding. And I have been influenced by a few people who have expanded my mental horizons on issues, and Gagan is one of them. Because the passion with which he works on issues, I realized कि इसके बारे में मैंने पहले सोचा ही नहीं था. So if I have an open mind, there is lots to learn. And through him, I met many other people. And then I became sensitive to one Dr. Karan Singh, whom we all know in India. And his started with an interaction in SPIC-MAC, and then slowly got to know him a little better, and then realized the multitude of dimensions of who is an Indian. And that issue also came up because when you go abroad, you automatically लगता है कि हम लोग Indian हैं. But who is actually an Indian? And that really helped me to expand. So that is my motivation, that is my inspiration, and I have decided I want to die on the table, काम करते करते जाना है.
बिल्कुल लगे रहेंगे. Sunil bhai, which brings me to this, the word CSR, which for civil society has become a very important word. Because, globally, as shrinking civic space, funding shrinking, CSR becomes a very important. However, before CSR became a regulatory thing, it was, whether it was the Bajaj or different organizations, I won't name them, but they were doing it by the heart. Today they're doing it by the law. Are you seeing a shift in the very engagement of the idea of CSR, which is corporate social responsibility? You can trace it back to Gandhiji. But you have seen this shift of how CSR is done from the heart and now exclusively with the head. And how do you see this? What's your stand on this? People are asking you these questions. How do you advise them?
Origin of CSR, I think, is really with the heart, as you rightly mentioned. And it was individual driven, large corporates. और उसके जो प्रमुख थे उनकी इच्छा थी कि यहाँ पे मैं स्कूल करूँ, यहाँ एजुकेशन के लिए, कॉलेज के लिए, और इस तरह से ये चल रहा था. ऐसा नहीं है कि कोई उसके पहले नहीं था. It was not a structured approach. It was dependent on the individual. But when they realized that this was around the 70s and 80s, this was the thing where the head of the business used to determine what is to be done, where and how much and how. Then came a slight shift, in my opinion, towards when people realized कि competition market में बढ़ रहा था. It was relatively less competition in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But with the LPG, liberalization, privatization, and the beginning of globalization, competition increased. And corporates realize that there is a certain amount of reputation that you can build with CSR activities. So branding and reputation actually emerged hand in glove into the whole system, which was otherwise by the heart, and the heart did not seek publicity. But I realized that the link that actually led to this transition was more competition in the market to differentiate with similar products, but showing that you have a heart in the whole business. So it was part of the broader appeal of CSR that tended to become part of this whole exercise. Then came a structure. People said, ये तो कर रहे हैं, लेकिन अभी programs became bigger, companies started growing. They said, ये तो 3 साल का program है. So the founder said that let another member of the family, typically a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law or जो भी है, and some family, extended family members came into the structure of a family business, where they took the money from the corporates under the direction of the patriarch and started doing this as an independent exercise with a structure of its own and engaging with civil society groups to realize that, they don't have the reach. एक village में जाके school बांधना है एक है, but to bring the children there and make the parents happy about the development, you have to work with communities. And this realization led to the fact that a separate structure within the CSR has to emerge at the level within the large corporates to be able to really try and do something in this. Then came the actual law that you referred to in 2013, 2% profit and all that. When it came, I was against it. I said, this is a matter of the heart, should be left to the heart and not mandated. It will become a tick mark, checkbox kind of an exercise. Today, money is being spent. But the conditions under which this money is being spent has put so many hurdles to expression of the heart, which even the founder has for the community in which he grew up. And that is now covered up because large corporations today earning 2% of the profit is a very reasonable sum of money, requiring a structured approach. And the government mandated that the CFO of the company has to sign off as a fiduciary responsibility to the amount that has been spent under CSR to avoid backtripping and use of CSR money by the corporates for doing what they call shared value. So the whole structure of CSR started to change because of this law and these fiduciary requirements for accountability. And it started moving it away from how it used to be done by the patriarch into now an extremely structured action. Now we are entering a new phase, which I think is a little positive development, where now people are realizing that there is a significant social impact because of the professionalization engagement along with civil society's group to work together to create impact. And once again, the corporates feel that this has become a competitive advantage. Now, this is just in the beginning stages, but I now realize and recognize the fact that it's a trend that needs to be captured. Unfortunately, what has happened is that last 20-30 साल में ये जो process of transformation हुआ, उसमें a lot of civil society organizations have been decimated. They have been finished. Now, when the demand is arising for engagement, there aren't enough people. So what is happening now is that the corporate is hiring the individual who was famous for something and is brought into the company, asked to do certain activities as an employee or as an extension of the employee to deliver CSR activities. It will not be the same as before. But truly speaking, if you want to look at development, it requires a different matrix. So I personally, even in retrospect, after 2013, अभी कितने 12-13 साल हो गए, I personally feel that it has helped focus the attention of corporates in the area to spend that money. And the amount is small. Last year we spent 35,000 crores. Yeah. In an economy of $4.5 trillion, it's a small drop in the ocean. So one cannot expect miracles from CSR. So willy-nilly, it has become one more addendum to the whole retinue of things that corporates do. And somewhere the spirit behind CSR, behind philanthropy, and more that even philanthropy is a bad word, being engaged and feel responsible towards the society that have nurtured you, have given you a place in themselves and also a place in their hearts for buying their products, that linkage is now broken, fundamentally broken. And this needs a reconstruction, needs a dialogue, it requires a restructuring. But the more we go towards corporatization of philanthropy, the further we will go away from the fundamental.
But exactly, Sunbhai, this mistrust between civil society and CSR is increasing because I think civil society cannot show you an outcome in 1 year. Development, better, is a engagement with communities or investment over 3, 4, 5 years. But when you are forced to produce data of outcome in 1 year, the very matrix of the civil society also is changing. Our frontline workers are becoming like Swiggy and Zomato workers rather than educators, animators. Investment of that is not understood. How do you think this mistrust, mismatch, who should understand it, what should change so that there is a better dialogue? And who are those institutions who can nurture those dialogues?
So today, where does a corporate engage with civil society? If you look at the broader picture, they first engage with them in some sense when they buy land for their activities. It's a source of a very important natural resource, and there is often a community in a village.
And conflict.
And that is one area. The second time is when they establish something, they have to get environmental clearance. So there is public hearings. That is the second time that they engage with civil society people. Third is when they produce their products and come into the market, and they have to deal with civil society on the consumer aspects as a customer of their products. And broadly, the fourth is the social media engagement. How do people perceive the company?
Yes.
And do they perceive the purpose and the profit, or do they only see them as sharks who are exploitative in nature? So these are the four of, maybe there'll be other points of engagement, but I think broadly, this is where a corporate engages. And what is the attitude of corporates when they engage with the public hearing? That these people are obstructionist. We as a good factory, it is going to create employment, it is going to create investments. Yes, we will take a little bit of water, but in return we are giving you jobs, we are giving you the entire development of the area, and these happens actually. When Sanand factory came, Tata came all the way from Calcutta here, Sanand is a transformed place. But the fact remains that, the corporate's view is that, they are afraid all the time that इसमें से लफड़ा होगा, MP, MLA से बात करेगा, हमारा project sabotage हो जाएगा. On the other side, what do the civil society people feel about industry in this engagement? They didn't consult us, they didn't talk to us, and they want to set up something, they want to take away which was ours, starting with the land, then natural resources around it, and their life is going to be transformed. It happens even when through a village you pass an urban development road. तो उसकी तो मतलब वो छत में से वो नीचे खेलते थे with all the toys, and suddenly there is a road and people and all that, and strangers come through the place. It's a major transformation for them. Of course, the old resist, the young say, पैसा मिल रहा है तो चला लेते हैं. So this whole process of transformation and engagement is done in an adversarial manner.
Right.
Nobody is looking at the big picture of how do we develop in such a way that the people are happy, because that is long-term benefit to the industry. And is the industry happy, because then they will continue to expand and do a lot of social work for them. But the whole approach is now litigious. वो obstruct करेगा, मैं उसको कैसे करूँगा, मैं उसको कैसे handle करूँ. Now, where is the scope for dialogue in this? We need a new compact. We need a new social contract where there is space where you, me, academic, people, NGOs, and even large tech companies all sit down together and decide what do you want to do with this area.
Correct.
Now, tragedy is that people are not even involved by industry. Of course, they are not involved, but people are not even involved by the government when they draw lands and say, this is my industrial estate and I'm going to develop it. They acquire the land. And then you have full freedom to do what you want, which has major ramifications for everybody living around it. Which otherwise in the earlier times, this was being done at some level by the government. आओ बेसो बात कर लो एक साथ बात कर लो. So the space has gone. Now who will start this space? If you look at broadly the three aspects, which of course is, I think you will come to it later, is that industry's job is to create jobs, bring investments, and do innovation at a very fundamental level. The civil society's group jobs is to ensure that they act as a watchdog on what the industry is doing, make sure the consumers are protected, make sure the environment is protected, and make sure that the benefit of this investments or this growth percolates down into society. And what is the government role? Regulation, because they have to execute what the watchdog is saying. And then in addition to that, they have to give incentives to industry to grow in a particular way, look at the economic development and look at social development and balance the two basic tensions in society. One seeks equity, one seeks monopoly and ruthlessness. This balance, who's going to regulate it? Originally, the government used to do it.
But remember, before Minar comes to the thing, on just this, what is the tragedy is when, state starts reducing its budget expenditure on health, education, and telling the corporates कि तुम तुम्हारा CSR उधर खर्चो. And therefore, this becomes a very angst issue. Ultimately, state's core business is health, infrastructure, education. And if they're sort of pushing that onto the companies then start, sitting on the high horse. We are going to run the schools. It's the job of corporates to finance schools. This becomes a very problematic area and navigating that is a big issue. I don't know how CSR policies are then designed. Is it by force, by pressure of the government? Yahan kharcho, yahan, I don't know. Inside story, you know that. I don't know how they are designing हमको कहाँ पैसा खर्चना है.
The decision to invest is by and large, complete freedom is given to corporates. What the government of India has done under the 2013 Act, under clause 135, it has listed activities that qualify as CSR expenditures. They have included health, education, and many other activities, including supporting startups and incubators. So I think there is freedom for the corporates to do it formally and informally. There is freedom. There is no pressure today. The large corporates have full freedom to do what they want to do. There are some projects in which the government says, would you be able to contribute money or would you take the responsibility for development? And I'll cite you an example from Ahmedabad city where there was a request saying that there is a major water crisis and there are no water bodies near villages. There are natural ponds, but that need to be completely done professionally. And from an ordinary water where the water just percolates and disappears into the subsoil, to build a proper lake, create a place where water stays, it reduces the temperature, improves humidity, dryness in Gujarat is a hot state. And in the evening where people can come and rest, can walk around the place, there is beauty. There is a place where they can eat and entertain themselves, but done in a very nice, classy way, and complete garbage disposal and everything, so the place is clean. And people take it as their own place and they own it, and the corporate exits. Wonderful example. But not forced, requested. So to the pointed question that is there a direction to where a CSR money is spent? No.
But they've set up the CSR authority.
So that is primarily for the public sector undertakings.
Okay, not
to
for
park their CSR because they are earning profits.
Got it.
To park it in the CSR fund and give it direction, and there they support the same kind of activities that the various departments are doing, except this is in a project mode, and therefore it was felt that they will get better outcomes than as a departmental thing which goes to the collector and the mamlatdar and all that.
Got it.
Here is a project, and they can involve innovative ways of doing it here, unlike in the government where there is a way of doing things. So it is an experiment for the CSR authority.
तो सुनील, आपने CSR के बारे में बहुत अच्छी एक बात रखी है कि उसका जो इवोल्यूशन हुआ 3 स्टेजेस में और अभी क्या सिचुएशन है और क्या होना चाहिए, ये CSR स्पेसिफिकली इंडिया के बारे में फ्रेमवर्क है. आप ग्लोबल फ्रेमवर्क जिसको हम कहते हैं ESG फ्रेमवर्क, एनवायरनमेंट सोशल गवर्नेंस का फ्रेमवर्क जो ग्लोबल है, यूनाइटेड नेशंस में उसके बारे में बहुत सारी चर्चा हुई. यूनाइटेड नेशन का भी ग्लोबल कॉम्पैक्ट जो है जिसमें ये ESG ये 3 एलिमेंट पकड़ा जाता है. आप सभी ये प्रक्रिया में फोरम्स में इन्वॉल्व है, दावोस में इन्वॉल्व है, वर्ल्ड इकोनॉमिक फोरम के प्रक्रिया से हो, इंडिया में अलग अलग फेडरेशंस हो, फिक्की हो, CII हो, गवर्नमेंट के साथ आप इंटरेक्ट करते हैं, सिविल सोसाइटी के साथ इंटरेक्ट करते हैं। तो 2-3 मुद्दों के ऊपर थोड़ी सी बात आप रख पाएंगे तो अच्छा रहेगा कि ये ईएसजी फ्रेमवर्क जो है, क्या ये टिक मार्क एक्सरसाइज है? उसके पीछे जो एक भावना थी कि क्यों हम ये लाना चाहते हैं, एक कंपोजिट, सभी जो सेक्टर्स है वो सभी लोग इसमें कुछ जिम्मा ले लें, उस ढंग की एक सोच थी उसके पीछे। अभी क्या हुआ है? और दूसरा जो है कि ग्लोबल फोरम्स जहाँ इसके बारे में बात होती है, बहुत सारे लोग इम्पोर्टेंटली बात करते हैं, लेकिन फिर वो अपने देश में जाने के बाद में वो बात का पॉलिसी में, लॉज में कितना अमल होता है,
और इन्वेस्टमेंट
में कि उसके पीछे कुछ पैसा लगाते हैं लोग की जस्ट बातें होती है।
सिचुएशन ऐसा था कि अगर कॉरपोरेट्स का जो बिहेवियर पैटर्न चेंज करना है, उसमें कॉन्शियसनेस लानी है, तो इंडिया की बात करें तो इंडिया में एक CSR रूल्स थे, काफ़ी सालों से थे, कुछ हुआ नहीं, जो होता था, हो रहा था, वही चलते गया। उसके बाद गवर्नमेंट रियलाइज़ की अगर इसके कॉरपोरेट का जो ध्यान है इसके ऊपर केंद्रित करना है एंड वी वांट टू सी सम रिजल्ट्स, तो इसको हमने BSR की जगह पे, विच वॉज द बेसिकली द ब्रॉड फ्रेमवर्क, दे क्रिएटेड अ न्यू रेगुलेशन कॉल्ड BRSR। और टॉप 1000 कंपनीज, एज यू नो, कि इट इज़ मैंडेटरी अंडर द लिस्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट। इसमें 9 पिलर्स है और उसके अंदर काफ़ी इंडाइसेस है, पैरामीटर्स है, तो कुछ 150-160 आइटम्स एक कॉरपोरेट, लार्ज कॉरपोरेट ने अभी नाउ दे हैव डेवलप्ड अ मैट्रिक्स इन देयर सॉफ्टवेयर एंड अ मेजरमेंट सिस्टम, तो रिपोर्ट करते हैं एवरी ईयर। हैज़ दिस हैपेंड? यस। हैज़ इट हैपेंड वेल? आई वुड से 60 आउट ऑफ 100 ऑन वेयर वी आर टुडे, एंड दिस इज़ अ क्वांटिटेटिव सर्वे डन इन इंडिया। 40 करेगा कि नहीं, मुझे लगता है द 60 विल गो टू 80-85 विद इन 1 ईयर, 1.5 ईयर।
ओके,
या रिपोर्टिंग शुरू होगा। नाउ कमिंग टू दी अदर एस्पेक्ट के टिक मार्क है कि नहीं, अभी तक तो टिक मार्क है, बट व्हाट हैज़ हैपेंड इज दैट दिस टिक मार्क एक्सरसाइज इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। आई विल गिव यू एन एग्जांपल। कोई बड़ा लार्ज कॉर्पोरेट है, वो 5 टाइप की एनर्जी इस्तेमाल करता है अंडर द ESG में। सो वन ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट आस्क्स इन दैट लिस्टिंग कि आप कितनी टाइप की एनर्जी कितनी यूज़ की पूरे साल में, पूरी कंपनी में। अभी अ लार्ज कॉर्पोरेट हैज़ 30-40 फैक्ट्रीज, सम हियर, सम अब्रॉड, running with different softwares and some measuring not the quantity but only the financial aspect कि इतना रुपए का हमने LPG लिया, इतना गैस खरीदा, इतना पेट्रोल खरीदा, इतना डीजल किया, इतना गाड़ी इस्तेमाल किया, इतना प्लेन किया। Now for the first time people are saying how much energy are we using, as a company। तो लोग अभी कैलकुलेट किया, फिर then they had to develop the software। Today that 60% of the companies have all developed softwares which report not only the price which we are spending, because that goes to the financial account, but the quantity. From where you can calculate the carbon footprint. So it is a very valuable step. Crash नहीं थे बड़े बड़े कंपनी में. When it came to under S, there were many aspects that were which brought to the attention. Everybody has developed crashes, and many other aspects of the 157 indices. Governance में people had 1 board meeting a year. Now it is mandatory to have 4. Are you maintaining minutes? Do you have genuinely independent directors? Do you record the minutes? Is there freedom to speak? How many times there has been a voice of dissent that was there? If you start keeping a magnifying glass on anything, you will suddenly find that the issues are now falling into buckets. So I think it's a very valuable first exercise. Correct. And they did it well. शुरुआत में क्या किया कि आप लोग सब companies measure करके आओ. 1 साल दिया टू अंडरस्टैंड कि क्या क्या करना है। नो मैंडेटरी रिपोर्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट। सेकेंड ईयर दे सेड अच्छा है बुरा है, जितना भी परफेक्ट है इम्परफेक्ट है, सेकेंड ईयर रिपोर्ट कीजिए अपने पर। थर्ड ईयर दे सेड नाउ यू आर सब्जेक्ट टू ऑडिट बिकॉज इट इज पार्ट ऑफ द फॉर्मल एजेंडा ऑफ एवरी P&L एंड बैलेंस शीट ऑफ अ कंपनी। 3 years is a decent amount of time for a corporate willing to do to change it. एक दिन में मैंडेट किया ना, बैकलैश होता है। Let it sink in. Then people recognize कि अभी जहाँ जहाँ बाहर जाते हैं तो कंपनी में वो भी ESG स्कोर पूछते हैं। कोई फंडिंग हाउस है बाहर का तो वो भी कहता है कि what is your environmental rating। तब उनको पता चलता है और they feel कि ये ESG rating is not to be taken lightly. It is being used by banks. It is being used by CEOs of foreign companies who want to be employed in your company. It is also looked at by people in advanced countries to see is your company favorably disposed towards the environment and social matrices, or you are exploiting child labor and so on and so forth. Yeah. तो ये सब जो है, it gives a strength to a company. अभी President Trump has started 60 investigations into developing countries to put new types of tariffs because the पुराना वाला तो उसके Supreme Court ने निकाल दिया. He says 60 investigations are starting. How many development countries are using forced labor? Now, if you have an ESG rating which has given you a clear score on S, the company will be able to stand up and say, no, you're wrong. हम नहीं कर रहे हैं. So it helps the corporates in the longer term to abide by this. Now this realization has come. So from a tick box exercise, it is now people realize there is economic
There's a
value.
value in it also.
It is not only to avoid punishment. It is now of strategic value to have the S in place, to have the G in place, because this is being looked at by many other elements of many stakeholders, which was not the case before.
ये जो इंटरनेशनल इसके जो फोरम्स होते हैं, जैसे वर्ल्ड इकोनॉमिक फोरम एक है, यूएन के ग्लोबल कॉम्पैक्ट के मीटिंग्स होते हैं बहुत सारी जगह में, और आपने देश में फेडरेशंस के अलग अलग, वो सीआई हो, फिकी हो, जो भी है, इनका कोई ये पुश करने में या अकाउंटेबिलिटी एस्टैब्लिश करने में एक रोल मॉडल करके ऐसे कुछ रोल्स आप देखते हैं, क्या होता है?
Yeah. I think industry associations, they develop consultants for this, which are not commercially very expensive because they train them. तो अपने खुद के जब ट्रेनर्स होते हैं, आई रिमेंबर इन 98-99 एक TQM करके आया था. इट वाज रिलेटिवली न्यू इन इंडिया, एंड देयर वर सम लीडर्स लाइक द किर्लोस्कर वाड़ी में, किर्लोस्कर्स दे एम्ब्रेस TQM इन अ वेरी बिग वे. उनकी सक्सेस स्टोरी देख के ऑल ऑटोमोबाइल कंपनीज इन इंडिया सेट कि करना है. द ट्रेनर्स वर ऑल फ्रॉम द इंडस्ट्री इंस्टीट्यूट, फ्रॉम द एसोसिएशंस. Similarly, today there are now trainers who are available to help you implement ESG in your companies. Large companies don't depend on these consultants. They use the 4-5 big sisters, and there are a lot of indigenous companies who do this. But MSMEs में जब करना है तो they can't afford those lakhs and lakhs of rupees for this. उसके लिए industry associations are playing this role of bringing consultants for less than 2 lakhs to do the energy audit, to review their entire performance on what is the total energy footprint of the company. So the industry associations play this role of playing to bring knowledge and actually help in implementation. And then these successful examples, then they shine out, and share it on platforms कि इसने ये किया तो इसमें economic benefit ये हुआ, ये social benefit हुआ, and this is what it cost them. वो confidence peer से आता है, peer experience से. And that can only be done by an industry association. Nobody else can do it.
Yeah, but Sunil bhai, just supplementary to this, Minar, because we work together on some of these things. The big industries say हमारा घर अंदर साफ है, and but 60-70% of everything is the supply chain, vendors वगैरह. There the squeezing goes. जब उनके पास जाते हैं तो बोलते हैं कि उनको पहले बोलो, they are not giving us a margin, and ultimately फिर I break and do the thing, whether it's on labor, on environment. Governance is different. Now, is it just not important कि मैं अपना घर साफ रखूं, but see it as a holistic this thing? Where is the challenge is there?
Challenge is, I think a lot of people have realized that L1, which is the lowest quotation, is invariably the maximum headache also. The governments have also realized, they have found ways that you chase the lowest quotation, you think you have a very economic thing, but the consequences of not the correct level of quality person, it exhibits itself in bigger problems later. So it is really being penny wise and pound foolish. So most corporates today look at L1, definitely, because it acts as a sort of guiding principle. But they look at many factors before they choose a supplier today, especially when it comes to extremely sensitive markets. For example, if it's an aircraft part and it is being sold to Boeing, you can't have a guy who is now wearing, in banyan and slippers, his factory fellow is coming and turning out the program on a lathe. वो नहीं होगा ये. He has to go to a company that has the full quality control system, his own purchasing, his own the system of validation, and 100%, there is no possibility of a failure in every component. So zero defect in actual practice. So the markets dictate these things very well. I don't think there is a failure here.
Which brings me to the still larger question. With all this, and you are seeing it every day, data is showing it, inequality is rising. And market, maybe inequality is rising. So it's just not that it's in market. Within the market, there's a huge inequality. And I mean, in that sense, and then we talk of inclusive growth. ये contradictions बहुत acute होती जा रही हैं. And our corporates and CSR, as you rightly said, कुछ 2% is not going to solve the problem. And on the other hand, corporates need a good rule of law environment. I'm trying to
complete the loop. Yeah.
For them. ये बहुत contradictions हैं, Sunil bhai, and you are seeing them inside, you are seeing them outside. How do you see this being resolved? Whether they need new spaces, things like that. What are your thoughts on this?
I personally feel that this is a system that we have adopted. To chase an individual corporate who is operating in this system of pushes and pulls is going to be a challenge. And if you have to rely on the goodness of an individual or of corporate philosophy, which has a purpose in addition to profit, it is going to be of limited impact. This requires a systemic view of how things happen. So if you look at the pushes and pull that a corporate faces, there is severe regulatory pressures, severe competitive pressures, severe environmental pressures. Now in addition to that, there is severe technological pressures, how AI is going to create winners and losers in the market. And these are the big pictures, that is driving change. Then there are 6 or 7 other smaller areas which we won't go into, which are all influencing the corporates in their behavior. If you don't want to look at the causes of what drives a corporate to do what things they are doing, then we are only touching the surface of the whole problem. And you depend on the goodness of the individual, and you will never achieve large-scale results from it. You need to look at why this is happening the way it is. And therefore, there was, at some time, you remember there was this phrase that had come up, and I thought that was something we were quite capable, that there was promoter capitalism, where promoter says everything. Slowly, when all the stakeholders came into the picture and started the change and other things, it became, in a certain sense, accountable capitalism. But really the solution lies in responsible capitalism. Now this is a journey. We have come from 1 to 2. We have to go from 2 to 3. And willy-nilly, again, you will have to come to the fact that inequality, at what level of inequality you will say that this is too much? If the top 10% is earning more than the bottom 50% is too much? Or is it the top 40% is earning twice or thrice as much as the bottom 30% is too much? What is the criteria? There is inequality in every society.
Yeah.
And capitalism is a system which encourages the ones who have the ability to have freedom in growth. Now, if you let me ask you a reverse question, or let me pose this question. Would you rather have an India where you don't have Adanis, Ambanis, Birlas, Tatas and everybody? Because under the Competition Act, worstwhile, there was MRTP, Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Promotion Act. No monopolies were allowed, nobody was allowed to grow beyond a size. What did we get? A limping GDP at 3 to 4% in the country. Today we are going at double the rate and we still find it insufficient because now we are now seeing Viksit Bharat, we want to create this whole 300 million people out of it. How are you going to do it? The government is not giving employment. Who is going to generate the employment? It is these large corporates or small corporates that have been allowed to grow big. And then there is an issue of domination. So ugly growth is what we call it. You charge super profits if you like. There are very many ways of regulating hyper profits, even petroleum companies, because of a war when they do. There is a regulation for that. But don't curtail the animal spirits of entrepreneurship and innovation, because that stifles the economic development of a nation. Today, if China starts flooding your market, all the industries will be sitting ducks. You will be dependent on China. Then you will ask industry, "Tum kya kar rahe the? Why didn't you develop this?" Then will people point and say, we were not allowed to grow. We were not allowed to make large profits. We were not allowed to innovate and spend that kind of risk capital from the profits we make. So it needs a balanced approach in this. Inequality in itself is not bad. Abuse of dominance, which is what the Competition Commission of India is responsible for, has to do a better job. Because they should not eliminate all others who are wanting to rise, because that eliminates competition like Google does. They keep on buying at a fancy price all the things that start up, so that remains only one Google then. So abuse of dominance needs to be dominated. Inequality by itself is not bad. It is also the source of innovation, economic growth, employment, and opening out new avenues for development.
No, but Sunil, let's agree to some standard that inequality का क्या मतलब हर व्यक्ति को खाना तो मिलना चाहिए. We are horrible on hunger index.
So the question, no, I have my full sympathies with where you are coming from. But I want to pose a counter saying, if a man is hungry, should it mean that the Tata should not make the next new innovative vehicle? Fundamentally, it boils down to that.
No, it means...
So whose responsibility is it to feed the people? Is it the corporates?
But what about taxation?
Taxation, the use of taxation is a separate subject. But taxation today, if you want to... See, in every decision, there are trade-offs. If you want to bring investments into the country, you have to compete with Vietnam and China. What is the taxation there? So, look at from the regulator's point of view, from the government, you have a taxation of corporates at 45%. Great society. Then you wind up like Scandinavia. No growth. They tax heavily. 45, 50, 60%. US, they tax heavily. State has a tax.
So let's agree that there is a polarity.
Local has a tax. And the cumulative effect is that people are now leaving San Francisco and going to Texas. All the blue chip companies of the valley have now moved their headquarters all the way there because of taxation. And the infrastructure is crumbling there. So there are trade-offs. And a developing country is even more difficult to have these trade-offs because you are developing. There is a larger mass of people who are vulnerable. In that environment, to take a leap and say, I will support the large, it becomes tough for any electorate.
So there is a polarity there.
There is a polarity, and to my mind, at the end of the day, I would prefer the excesses of the large to the alternate, which means everybody remains poor. It's a harsh thing to say, but in retrospect, on reflection, I would much rather have some large companies leading the way for many other small companies to follow, rather than create a Russia economy, not necessarily communist, but a Fabian socialism, and curtail the animal spirits of your, economic sector. Without that, we are doomed to remain and caught in the middle income trap, which the World Bank has been saying ad nauseum. What is the middle income trap? You get into the middle, then you don't know how to rise out of it. What happens then?
पर बातचीत की तो जगह होनी चाहिए ना.
वो तो 100%. I have been a proponent of that. And बातचीत से ज़्यादा, I would like to see a structure. If you have a structure where they have to report, where they have to come together, they have to discuss the minimum 5 issues in the next 3 months, then that is what we call a structure, and that is missing in our society. As you see the excesses between the samaj, between the bazaar, and between society and the three forces, you need a corrective mechanism. Now there is no corrective mechanism today available. Correct. And you need a community, a compact, a new way of thinking about it in a structured way. Without that, every time one of the three goes in excess, you will have a problem. But we have not been able to harness the three together in a structured way to bring these energies to bear for economic development and social development in a balanced way.
तो सुनील भाई अभी वो 35,000 फीट से थोड़े वापस नीचे आ जाते हैं. बताइए कि आप जो बात कर रहे हैं इसमें कंज्यूमर सिविल सोसाइटी का पार्ट है, बराबर है. जब कोई डिजास्टर्स आते हैं, कोविड जैसे, कच्छ में अर्थक्वेक केस में आपका इन्वॉल्वमेंट था, उसमें सिविल सोसाइटी में भी बहुत बड़ी हलचल हो जाती है, क्योंकि बहुत सारे पुराने स्ट्रक्चर्स, पुराने सोचने के तरीके, और जो उसको रिस्पॉन्ड करते हैं, फिर वो कॉरपोरेट्स हो, गवर्नमेंट हो, फॉरेन डोनर्स हो, सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हो, एनजीओज हो, टेक्निकल इंस्टीट्यूशंस हो, डिपेंडिंग ऑन द टाइप ऑफ द डिजास्टर. इसमें भी आपने काफ़ी काम किया हुआ है. तो ये जब आप देखते हैं कि व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ अ कंज्यूमर, इज As you know, now large markets are growing in the mofussil towns and those kinds of things. बहुत सारे consumers वहाँ से आ रहे हैं कि सिर्फ urban sector में नहीं है. तो उनके राइट्स के बारे में क्या हो, क्योंकि कंज्यूमर प्रोटेक्शन का एक ढांचा है, वो कितना इफेक्टिव चल रहा है, कितना इफेक्टिव नहीं चल रहा है. कंज्यूमर को 50 रुपये के कंप्लेंट के लिए 5,000 रुपये खर्चा करना पड़ेगा, तो फिर कोई करने वाला है ही नहीं. तो इट बिकम्स यू नो, एंड ऑल दीज आर इश्यूज दैट गगन वाज रेजिंग कि द स्टैक्स आर organized in such a way that particular parts of society are being kept in their place in a way, whether you are a consumer, whether you are just a simple farmer, whatever, you look at those kinds of status. तो आपने कहा ये दोनों में एक्सपीरियंस है. कंज्यूमर राइट के तो आप तो चेयरपर्सन है CERC के. डिज़ास्टर में आपका एक्सपीरियंस है पूरे कच्छ में जो आपने ऑर्गेनाइज किया था गवर्नमेंट के साथ, CI के साथ में. तो दोनों एक्सपीरियंस से लेकर क्या आगे की दिशा क्या होनी चाहिए? व्हाट आर द लर्निंग्स, व्हाट शुड वी बी डूइंग, व्हाट शुड वी बी फोकसिंग ऑन, किसके ऊपर हमने ध्यान देना चाहिए?
आई थिंक डिज़ास्टर के बारे में संक्षिप्त में अगर बताऊं तो मुझे लगता है कि द बेस्ट वे टू डील विद डिज़ास्टर इज़ टू अवॉइड देम. द कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज हैव बीन डायर एंड यू स्पेंड 10 times द अमाउंट ऑफ मनी फॉर द कॉन्सिक्वेंस ऑफ अ डिज़ास्टर
एंड वेस्टेज.
जितनी चीज़ें बनी बनाई इमारत अगर टूट जाए तो पहले तो निकालो, and all the rest of it that goes into it. Disaster mitigation is the fundamental principle on which new development and old development must be reviewed. And what are they saying? They are saying build energy that doesn't generate more carbon. See, it's a medium term, long term project है, लेकिन बाढ़ आ गया, इमारत गिर गई, floods आ गए, and then heat waves for affecting agricultural crop. All this requires forward planning. A simple example of growing heat-resistant millets can actually safeguard us from food shortages arising from climate change and disasters. इसमें इतना काम होना चाहिए कि on a war footing that it ensures staples of all types to be taken care of. When the other thing that the corporates play a role in this is that they shape now. There are so much of technology that is available in disaster management. Government अपनी तरफ से private corporate से technology लेके they deploy it themselves. Sometimes they take these contracts for deployment. High speed buildings can come up very quickly in 7 days and 10 days for temporary shelters, temporary food. Kitchens that can move in completely like mobile kitchens to start developing and support. So that phase of activity is there immediately during disaster and then the post disaster phase. But if the largest amount of the budget is spent on mitigation so that it doesn't happen, even though it looks as if it is impossible to mitigate today, believe me, it is 1 rupee well spent is equal to at least 100 rupees in terms of the consequence. On the issue of consumers, companies have become large. The people who are selling platforms have emerged. Amazon hai, all the big platforms online. हर एक sector में भी हर एक में platforms आ गया है. And there is an anonymous company that you don't know is offering a good product which is rated 3.5 out of 5 and you feel ये लेने जैसा है. अभी आपको ये मालूम नहीं है कि ये जो रैंकिंग दी है 3.5 out of 5 वो फेक है कि सही है. So the issue that the regulation must clarify is that should the platform be responsible for doing the due diligence before allowing the product, या जिम्मेदारी सेलर की है and the platform acts as a platform. कि गेटवे है, आप गेट में से आए और गए एंड रिस्पॉन्सिबली आपने बनाया, आपने बोला कि ऐसा ऐसा प्रोडक्ट है, ऐसा नहीं है तो यू पे द बिल. सो दिस इज अ कांस्टेंट टसल दैट इज हैपनिंग. बट द बिग बेनिफिट टुडे इज दैट स्मॉल एंड मीडियम, वेदर अर्बन और रूरल, all are benefited by this service. But there is also a negative side. What do these companies do with your data? आपका प्रोफाइल उनके पास कंप्लीट है. आप कौन सी चीज़ कहाँ पे कितनी देर बार कितनी बार लेते हो, कितना आपने सोशल मीडिया में किया, आपका पूरा पर्चा है. एंड आई विश दे हैव अ सिस्टम वेयर बाय द लॉ मेक्स इट मैंडेटरी फॉर दीज कंपनीज टू से मिनार भाई ये आपका प्रोफाइल अमेजॉन में है, ये आपका प्रोफाइल गूगल में है. यू विल बी शॉक्ड. You will be shocked what is in the public domain. I mean, not public, but it is in the private domain available for sale to other people to make more money out of you. So the consumer of today is like a bakra. He gives all his data because he gets a service. But what is the dire consequence of an AI that works on all this data about you then you are again leaving yourself open, for example, the issue of democracy. If this Google can now know that you have leaning, Gagan likes, he's a socialist in thinking. They will feed him all the data about socialism and all that. He will make him buy products that are made by artisans. He will do say, paisa to banayega, but he will also influence him in an echo chamber to help him vote for a party that he feels is the right person by talking about a goon who is now being transformed through advertisement, which is targeted to him, and he will then finally vote for a goon that he would have been aghast ke ye to mujhe malum hi nahi tha iske baare. Now this is the reality of what we are living. All the large companies are saying that. So consumer is one aspect of it. There is also bigger things at stake here in this world of technology, and is used by relatively few companies. India is a shining example. हम लोग इन लोगों को कंपनी को अभी रेगुलेट कर रहे हैं कि आपका हमारा डेटा हमारे इंडिया में रहे. It has to be declared. You will have a right to say remove my data, and it will actually be removed. But they say there is a famous state, once you put anything on the net, it is there forever. So वो सब doubt तो है, लेकिन at least obvious use of the data for marketing वो तो बंद हो सकता है, and that power should be yours. It is your data.
Exactly.
So India is like a shining example in a world of 6 tech companies which are dominating the Western world. Somewhere someone has to take a stand against this complete avalanche of technology companies taking over your consumer behavior as well as your democratic rights and your right to fundamental privacy. And Europe is somewhere in between. Europe has done generally a good job of regulation, unlike America, in several sectors. Balanced है. But their problem is कि एक बार एकत्रित होके काम करना चाहते हैं तो बहुत slow pace है. They cannot even decide when to put together and build the first bomb to throw therein. Maybe this is a crisis situation, but नहीं कर पा रहे हैं. America is saying what happens when corporates take over. And India wants to strike a balance between the two. They want to encourage growth, but at the same time not abandon. Now this balance could be, like you have in a mutual fund, they say low risk, high risk, and everything in between is at a different level. So I'm asking you a question. You want to say corporate responsibility. Who defines responsibility? We have not answered the fundamental question, but we talk about corporate responsibility.
And therefore the need for dialogue fora.
वो तो 100%.
I'm going back and back to that. Dialogue fora just not in, these big this thing.
No.
एक पंचायत में भी कमिटियां हैं, वहाँ भी बात नहीं होती, कोई बात करने वाला है नहीं. Schools, education. But, on the consumer thing, we have just come up with a report and on analyzing the state
about the Justice Report? India.
Yeah, India Justice Report. We came up with the consumer fora ka analysis based on government data. And I think that institution has to be strengthened, like many other institutions. And therefore I come to the last bit, back to what you have already said. State, market, civil society, राज्य जिसे कहेंगे बाजार, समाज और सरकार, ये तीन में क्रिएटिव टेंशन होना चाहिए, ये हम मानते हैं. तभी सोसाइटी, यू कैनॉट हैव कि बाजार इज टोटली अनलीश्ड. वी आर हैविंग अ सिचुएशन जहाँ स्टेट
नो रोल,
को कोई होल्ड नहीं करता,
कोई माँ बाप ही नहीं है,
और आई वुड से इवन समाज की संस्थाओं में काफी सड़ा आ गया है. तो आई एम नॉट ट्राइंग दिस थिंग फ्रॉम इट. तो ये तीन अगर वापस हमें एक वाइब्रेंट स्पेस बनानी है, व्हाट आर द विच इंस्टीट्यूशंस एंड व्हाट टाइप ऑफ इंस्टीट्यूशन वुड बिकम वेरी क्रिटिकल टू टेक अस फॉरवर्ड?
सो आई थिंक फर्स्ट we have a peculiar development in India कि यहाँ पे अभी हमारे सोसाइटी में से कोई रोल मॉडल पीपल रहे नहीं है, which there was no shortage of at the time of independence. Now role model ऐसा होना चाहिए कि who can challenge people, force them to think and help to convene them into a group to say ये गलत है, ये सही है, and to be a moral guide in an era of violent transformation and change. Without that anchor, I think we have a problem. People don't follow institutions, people follow leaders. So if we have to approach this whole science and art of bringing people together I think it has to start with at least one person per state who we can recognize as a force for the good. So he should not be a politician. He should not be somebody of a large industrialist whose only goal is that way. Though there are good politicians who have done very good work, there are very good industrialists who have done a lot of good social work. But in order to maintain their own independent thing, like the Rishi Munis of the past, who used to sit and advise the prime ministers and the kings of the past, who had no vested interest in taking one way or the other, and they were purely governed by the sense of public good. A creation of at least 35 people in the country, recognized, and then take them together in a hill in Panchgini. If you want the venue, I'll give you. He has no shortage. And spend a week together to look at the problems of India, and then come out with a coherent document and a strategy as to how do we move forward. And from there, then you can start picking institutions which may be dormant, which may be active, which may be polarized today, but otherwise very effective because of their grassroots levels. And then create this coalition of the willing. And I'm coming back to the thing, a voluntary exercise to drive change. But we have to be careful that these people who are coming into it can come from all backgrounds, but should not represent only one particular group.
Correct.
They should have a balanced view of life. और अभी हमारी सोसाइटी में कोई भी ऐसा, मुझे गुजरात में मैं सोचूं कि who is a leader of the stature of a Sardar Patel, a Mahatma Gandhi, they became politicians. But they were all otherwise working for the good of the people. Nobody even today in retrospect can say that was a petty political decision. बिल्कुल नहीं है. Where are those people today? And do you need an academy to nurture these people? I'm asking questions.
Yeah. I think so.
There is a gap today. Why is it that Odisha में कोई नहीं है, यूपी में कोई नहीं है? बाबा आमटे थे वहाँ पे वो you know what was that fellow who went on non fast कर गया दिल्ली में?
Anna Hazare.
There were these sparks that happened, but nobody came on to the state level scene or a national scene where everyone says, "Can wait, let's listen to what he has to say."
JP was one.
JP was one. There are many people who are like your conscience keeper. I think that's the correct word.
Conscience keeper. Correct.
Conscience keeper.
Yeah.
कि उसको सुनने के बाद तुमको और कुछ सुनने की जरूरत नहीं है. In the meantime, while you develop this, I think it is important to harness all the thoughts in this and publish at least 4 or 5 essays on this issue. Create discussions around that. People at least, what did the people of yesterday say about how to handle situations of transformation and so. Remember, since 47 to now, we have come a long way. Many people have given so much of yogdan कि उसको पूरे वे जर्नी में ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन में कितनी मदद की है हमको. And they have learnt in the process. But उसका जो निष्कर्ष था वो खो गया है अभी. Even as a first step, if we revive the knowledge of the last 50, 60 years since independence, 75 years, we will gain so much. And by thinking on those, maybe some new leaders will be born. So it becomes source material for sourcing, developing, identifying and nurturing leadership of a kind that will take us to both Viksit Bharat 2047 and net zero by 2070.
And hopefully less violent society.
Yeah.
Compassionate.
Compassion, empathy.
Sunil bhai, it's been an amazing conversation and really value this. And I think, I hope those who will listen to this will start these dialogue forums in their smaller spaces. And from that emerges another, and a diverse, not just civil society talking among themselves. Civil society, state, market, those understanding with technology, and start looking at which institutions can play a critical role and need facilitators like you in that process. Thank you so much for being with us, Sunil bhai. Really appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank you very much, Sunil bhai.
Thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed. You always force people to think.